Hi.
Hi, Cody.
Hello. Oops.
Need to get something more interesting in my Zoom background.
It's too late, Aaron. Zoom is over.
It might be. All my customers have me going back to site.
Yeah, well, certainly for town board stuff, it's over. I'll
Hey,
miss
guys.
it, I think.
Not a moment too soon.
Yeah, I'm ready to go back to in person.
Hello.
Hello.
Hey, Fern.
Hi, Lou. How you doing?
Not bad.
Good.
This is iPhone 2.
It's always a good thing.
Yeah, hey, it could be a lot worse. I'm in front of an air conditioner, so that's good.
Yeah, I'm in front of one that works halfway, so it's not.
Oops. What we got here?
It's unfortunate.
Dorothy, you'll have to let me know if there's too much road noise or something in my mic.
Okay. Yeah, everybody, iPhone 2. If you can see that's Mal. He's calling in tonight. Hopefully no hackers. We're going to, this is going to be a short 1-hour meeting at Lou's request. Although, as I said in my email, I'm really hoping that we can have a 2-hour meeting in July and basically tonight go through these new substantive issues, kind of nail them down, and then with the rest of our time go through language and comments and questions, and then in July really just go page by page, nailing down the language, and ideally finish up so that we don't have to have a meeting in August. So I think everyone would like to not have a meeting in August. So we'll wait just 1 minute. Who are we waiting for? 2, 5, 6. We have 6 people. Wait, let's go ahead and start in just one more minute since we're tight on time. So the first issue that we'll cover, just so everybody can get to the right page, is we'll do the racetrack definition, which I'm looking at the PDF that's on the Dropbox. So that's on my page 18.
That's a different
And kind of all get there. So we don't have Chuck, so that's probably, okay. All right, so we'll go ahead and start. Now there may be comments to the language itself, and like I said, we can revise that in the next round. I just want to see if we're kind of all on the same page. This issue arose because there was a racetrack issue that came before the zoning board, and the zoning board had a number of questions about the definition in terms of what constitutes a racetrack. So they've asked us, well, they asked the town board, but since the town board has asked us to give advice, we are trying to kind of clarify that racetrack definition. And I think, one thing that to think about is that obviously, dirt bikes and off-road vehicles and, all kinds of things are certainly allowed in Ghent, and you can drive them across your road, and you can, if you can drive it on other people's property if you get permission. The issue here is when there is more of an established track that has been created in somebody's yard, and that's whether it's commercial or whether it's private. And basically the zoning board found that it was it was about the intensity of use that made it not an approved accessory use. But to clarify this definition, I think some of their questions were, does it matter how it was made? Does it matter whether it was private or commercial? Does it matter what it's made of? Those kinds of questions. So Nan sent some language. Chuck Wood also sent an email with some comments requesting that we clarify that it's not just racing. I think that's a really good comment, that it could also apply to a track where there were demonstrations or practice or training or stunts, those kinds of things. The idea being that it's the existence of a track for regular and repeated use that draws an intensity of use that's not appropriate for residential neighborhoods, and that the town has decided is not something that we want to have commercially. So, in terms of what Nan has here, just a couple of clarifications that I would want to make are that it doesn't really matter what the pathway, course, track, all of those words could be used. It doesn't matter what the material is, whether it's dirt, paved, gravel, some kind of new kind of material, that it's basically any track, course, pathway, regardless of how made, regardless of whether it's commercial or private, that's designed for any of these uses: racing, demonstrations, practice, training, stunts. I didn't think we needed the last sentence since we are prohibiting racetracks in Ghent. And then I leave open the question of whether we want to allow temporary racetracks. If we do, I would suggest that we tie them to 190.19L, which is the exhibitions and festivals. It's really concerts, exhibitions, or festivals. And that's sort of the temporary occasional event provision in the code. Any thoughts?
I don't think this gets to the root or the heart of the issue for the application, or for the request that was in front of zoning.
All right, what would you say is the root of the issue?
That the neighbors didn't like motorcycles or quads
Right.
being run around the property.
No, but I don't think that the intention is to prohibit your neighbor from having a motorcycle or a quad. That in terms of zoning, the issue is you can't have a racetrack.
The one problem I see with this is
Right.
that we need to define racing. Because I could see how this could be interpreted by a ZEO as pretty openly. And you know, we probably should define racing.
Well, I think we were talking, what I was just mentioning is the idea of expanding it, because it's not really whether they're racing or not. It could be practice, it could be demonstrations, it could be training, it could be stunts. The idea is what we're prohibiting through zoning is a track. Somebody riding their three-wheeler across a field is not a track and is not something.
So Cody, I think that one of the issues, to piggyback on what Lou was saying, is the issue not of somebody, you know, kind of one-offing doing something. It's the fact that you have a cluster of people riding at the same time, and then it does become racing. You know, at least-
Yes, but what I'm saying is more is prohibiting more expansive uses than strictly racing.
No, and I hear that, but the
Prohibiting regular use of a track is the track
Right.
that we're regulating by zoning. We're saying you cannot have a racetrack. The question that the planning board had, although, you know, I actually thought the language was clear, but the question that the planning board had was, oh, well, what if it was not, what if it was man-made versus somebody just riding the track over and over again? And I think that what we need to clarify is it doesn't matter how it's made. It doesn't matter what the material is. If you have a track that's causing people to ride their vehicles over and over in the same spot, that is what is prohibited. But if you are riding your three-wheeler across a field, that is not prohibited, as long as they are following the rules of the town code in the vehicles off-road section in terms of licensing, and you have to be 100 feet from somebody's house, and, you know, there's a whole other set of provisions relating to riding these vehicles. But what we are trying to prohibit is somebody putting in a track, because that is what invites the intensity of use.
Well,
Right,
what I'm concerned about with the way this is worded is, if you have a path through the woods for your quad or your gator or for whatever, the minute you get more than one person on that path, you know, and these paths exist throughout Ghent, where people have paths through their woods, and they're not racing, but there may be more than one person. So they have two vehicles. The danger with this, the way this is worded, is that that could be interpreted, because it is a man-made path through the woods, as a racetrack. And I know the intent is not to do that or stop that. You're trying to stop racetracks. And you know,
it sounds
there's
like
places for those, but you know,
it sounds like what we're saying is we're not going to allow four-wheelers, quads, motorcycles, motorized vehicles to be used in a way that creates a path or a track.
right. So
It's just real quick on that applicant. They came before the board twice. The first time was strictly an intensity of use. Oh, I'm sorry, it was not an intensity of use, except that they had 6 kids, and I don't know, 4 or 5 or maybe all 6 of them rode dirt bikes, and it was strictly used by their own family. The second time they came before us, they had expanded, and they were inviting friends and others. So that became an intensity of use. But the second time they came before us, there was no structure. It was strictly paths or tracks made in their lawns and through the woods.
Yeah, I would say there was still some structure there, not on the front, not on the lawn, but if you started to walk the path of the woods, you would see areas where there were the potential for jumps and all sorts of other things that were being laid out. The tires were to the side because you didn't want anybody to get hurt. I mean, it was clearly set up, not as a ride through the woods.
Right. Oh, yeah, absolutely. That was based on intensity of use, but it was used by their family, by their kids a lot. And then, like I say, it expanded. The second time they came before the board, they had invited other friends. So I guess the question is, are we saying we don't want to allow motorized vehicle use?
I think you could have motorized vehicle use, but I don't think that you certainly should not be allowed to have a closed loop. At a minimum, a closed loop. That's what came before you. That was a racetrack. That was a closed loop track. Absolutely, without question.
Right. It was a track. That's right. But it wasn't, it was a practice track is probably a better way to describe it.
Looking at what we were seeing in the videos, they were maybe practicing, but they were racing. And so we could kind of go back and forth on this in lots of different ways, and different eyes see things a little differently. But to me, that was a racetrack, maybe a practice racetrack, but a racetrack.
Yeah, to me, it makes no difference if they're actually racing or if they're practicing,
Right.
they're doing timed racing. None of that matters. I mean, I guess the question is, certainly, okay, let's start with what we can agree on. Do we agree if somebody builds a closed loop track on their property, even if it is a path, and they've got vehicles going around and around and around, then that is not allowed?
Well, this goes back to what I'm saying is a closed loop path through the woods is not a big deal. It's the intensity of that use that is the problem for the neighbors.
Yeah, and I think
I mean, my father-in-law has a path through the woods twice a day. He takes his gator and drives up through there. And it's just, he's out for a ride. So he's not racing, but if somebody, if I took my quad and I rode with him, we're not going to be racing, but the way this thing is written, that's illegal.
Right. Nan, do you have any suggestions? You see the distinction that's being made there? We've had situations where people are building basically just a closed loop motocross racetrack in their yard.
Right. So Kotha, you wouldn't have to necessarily build one. It would be created just based on the terrain.
I understand. Yes, I understand. No, and absolutely. However it's created, it's created.
Right. So we don't want that. I mean, I don't think we want that. That's definitely a slippery slope, because somebody could ride around their property and create what will look like a racetrack just from use, but they will say, we didn't build it. We didn't bring anything in. We didn't construct it. We didn't add anything. So I don't think we want to say constructed in the definition.
No, we're not. We're not. Absolutely not. However it is built or made, absolutely 100%, that's still a racetrack. The distinction that I'm trying to tease out is if someone has a path through the woods, which could be for hiking, it could be for mountain biking, whatever, and then sometimes they ride their quads on it. Nan, do you have a suggestion for how to make that distinction?
Can I ask one other thing of Jeff as he talks about it? There is, I mean, the side issue of all this, of course, is the noise, right? And I know that there is a desire not to have a noise ordinance in town. That said, are you and your father-in-law riding your motorized vehicles at 10 o'clock at night or at 6 in the morning? I mean,
No.
Right, but that's a piece of it too, because there are, issues when somebody decides to go out with their threesome in the family at early mornings or late nights.
As an analogy to this, because I'm just.
But even during the day, when there's 7 people riding the track next door, one cannot run a workshop, one cannot have a Zoom meeting, one can have nothing because the 7 ATVs next door, the sound of them reverbs through your whole home.
Hey, Megan, this is Lou Streeter. I don't think we've met.
We haven't, and I'm sorry, I probably should have shut up, but I had to interject because it's not that it's an early morning thing. I live on Fowler Lake Road and there is a racetrack next to me and I'm trying to learn enough so I know what to do next.
Okay. So, Megan, are you on the committee?
No, I was told by the zoning officer that this was an open meeting.
No, it is. I didn't recognize you. That's all.
Okay, sorry.
Not a problem. So to me, it sounds like it's a noise issue. And I will say this before we let Nan talk. We need to be careful that we're not going to allow people to put a riding ring in. If, let's say, they do for horses and train their horses for a race. I mean, that's okay because it doesn't make a lot of noise. Doesn't make any noise. But the way this is written, that would be included.
As a total non-expert on how this stuff works, what would be an analogy like with a garage, right? So I have a garage, I can do an oil change, I can change my muffler, make a little noise, right? When does the activity from me doing that from my own leisure go from that to becoming, say, a nuisance? If I have people driving in and out, I'm doing everybody in the town's muffler and making a lot of noise. What rule do we have in place? Maybe there isn't one to prevent, say, that kind of activity.
There's not a noise ordinance, and so it's not about noise. This is why this has always been regulated in Ghent by prohibiting racetracks, with the idea that, you know, that's drawing the noise.
Right, Lyle, that would be a business, right? So if you were doing that work for others, you'd have to get a permit to do that, whether it was home occupied business or one of the other special
He could be doing it for his friends for fun. You can make noise at your house. You can have a wedding for your friends at your house every weekend, and that's something that you're entitled to do. It's not, you can, as long as nobody's paying you for it. If you've just got, oh, this friend, that friend, oh, I'm letting you use my property, you can have a big, huge, loud party every weekend at your house. That's not regulated. So, I mean, that's being a bad neighbor, but, you know, until it becomes a business, generally that's not. But the idea with the racetrack is that is a particularly loud and disruptive activity. And so historically, the town has prohibited racetracks with that idea. If you have a racetrack, you're going to have a lot of racing, a lot of activity. Now, a path through the woods is different.
Well,
There are a few things in our town that we are concerned about the noise, and we regulate something else instead.
Well, we don't.
So, but Kothi, if you use your example and somebody is having a wedding every weekend, that would be just as disruptive as a racetrack.
Yeah, but you can't, this is something we can very easily regulate.
well,
You can't have a racetrack. Now, a path through the woods, I agree. You cannot regulate that. You can have a path through the woods.
The way this is written, you could regulate that.
and that's what my argument is. That the way this is written, you're prohibiting stuff far beyond what you're intending to.
What we need to
Me
do
personally,
is clarify what we want to regulate and what we don't. And we're going to work on the language next time. But can we please let Nan?
Yes, go ahead, ma'am.
Suggestion.
You know, I think what Kothi just said is I'm hearing you all say that you have different perspectives on what needs to be regulated here. So the bottom line is, I think it's all of the things that, you know, yes, the practice vehicles, you know, just all of the things that you talked about, demonstrations, practice, training, stunts, all of that should be, it's not just racing. I think that it is a noise issue. But noise, you can't, it would be very difficult to have you can set a noise limit here for this use. And some communities do. Some communities require, if you have more than X number of bikes in any, or motorized vehicles in any one place, that that they have to have noise canceling mufflers on them, or that there's a limit on the number that you can have at any one time. There's a lot of enforcement issues with those kinds of regulations. So, yeah, and I agree that I think the animal racing part of this was it's black print, so I'm thinking it was there before. And I don't think you were talking about horse racing or other kinds of racing. It's motorized racing. But I think that you either go down the path that this is getting at, which regulates the use of a pathway or a track, or you regulate by the number. So you can regulate by the use, you can regulate by the number of motorized vehicles and say, you can only have X number going at any one time, which also can be an enforcement issue, and or add in the noise. You know, I think that what you have to decide is how willing, you know, I think that the communities are reticent to do these kinds of things because a lot of these are families using their own land. It's not for, you know, a club or commercial enterprise. It's just, you know, kids and families and their friends coming to ride their dirt bikes on their property. So a lot of communities they feel that it goes too far to regulate and say, well, you know, you can only have 2 dirt bikes or 2 motorized vehicles at any time on your own property. It can be done, and some communities do that. But I think, again, you have the potential for 2 problems here. You have the potential for someone on their private property using dirt bikes, and I live next to one. My nephew had a dirt bike and invited his friends over every weekend and made jumps and loops and right next door to us, and drove me crazy for years. You know, and that was just a couple of kids out in the back, you know, out in the back 20. So you have to decide whether you want to go to that level to regulate those kinds of activities. And the racetracks do occur in rural areas, and they are, I can give you a bunch of examples where they went from an informal, you know, motorized vehicle club that had a few people to like huge events that are every weekend with, you know, people bringing their bikes in from all over. So I think both ends are potential land uses in the town. So I think, but you have to decide how willing you are to get at, you know, the neighbor's family that has 6 kids and each of them has a dirt bike. Are you willing to regulate that through zoning? Can you? Yes. Do you want to? That's another question. And so I'm not giving you a definitive answer, but I think you haven't decided what you really want to regulate yet.
I mean, I think that we've had enough complaints of repeated use of long-term noise that when there is a track, it tends to expand to these club events where a whole weekend you're getting, you know, noise, and then also, you know, the one we had on Archbridge Road, you know, the neighbors were making these audio recordings. They were really getting no rest.
So you said the town has had complaints?
Yes.
How have we handled them?
Well, the one went before the zoning board, and the other
Okay.
one Chris has been investigating. I mean, we've also had, by the way, complaints about the three-wheelers and ATVs getting on other people's property,
Right, yeah.
riding on the road. We get complaints very regularly about those things as well, because typically when people are riding through the woods, they're not just riding through their own woods. That's a separate matter. That's already covered by the off-road vehicles law in the town law. That is not part of the zoning code.
So
What-
where was the second complaint? Do
It's
they
on
have a
Fowler-
track?
Yes, Fowler Lake.
Does
What-
Chris have like a list of complaints he's received?
Sure he does.
Because I know of at least one that you're not mentioning that he received within the last year too. So does he have a list of?
I'm sure he does. You know, he's
So just keep in mind, the reason we have all these tracks, or the reason that these exist, is because of Claverick Motocross. And, you know, going back years, I can tell you where there were probably 10 of them, 10 different tracks where people all rode over the years. And, you know, my family, my in-laws, there's tracks everywhere. There were. And it's primarily because of Claverick Motocross. And these kids want to be able to practice and then want to go down there and race.
Can I
And
say, if I had known there was a track next to
Yeah.
my house, I wouldn't have bought the property and spent $1 million on landscaping. It's different when it's something that's established. When it's created while you live here, it is a little bit of a difference.
So the reason I ask is, and I think Aaron may have hit on it. I'd like to kind of get a better understanding of what it is that's causing the noise before we try to regulate it. Because I think it's pretty simple to say, you know, home occupied use. Right? The one over on Archbridge Road extension was clearly an intensity, and other users, non-family people were coming. And so, you know, to keep it focused on family use, that's a pretty straightforward change.
Except
To go ahead, Fern.
except when you start talking about the family as your cousins and second cousins and aunts and uncles, and they're all getting together. And while Cody says that we can have weddings every week on our property, it seems to me there still has to be some sort of issue on this. I mean, people that do that usually go, we're knocking on their neighbors' doors to say, by the way, I'm having this event. Is that okay with you?
Right.
When the event occurs, please come on over and join us, you know.
Well, and it basically comes down to being a good neighbor.
Right.
And yeah, there are bad neighbors.
Yeah,
You know,
no, to your
but
point,
we-
Fern, it could be one motorcycle with, you know, 6, 8, 10 kids riding it, and it just never stops.
Right.
Right.
But
So
if you have one motorcycle that's making that much noise, then maybe there also has to be something about parameters on what kind of motorcycles we're allowing to be used, you know, next to another neighbor, and what the distance is that needs to be there. We certainly do that with event spaces. We do it with all sorts of things.
I have a
The,
rhetorical
perhaps
question.
the most equitable way to regulate these things is with a noise level. And then it doesn't matter whether you have 1 or 10, you know, or whether it's I think to set a rule that says it's okay if it's your family, but not if you bring in others, is not enforceable or tenable. But I think if you set a noise limit that could be measured at the property boundary, then that is something that's more understood and defensible, I think. And then if someone has a really large piece of land and they're doing whatever they're doing in the interior and no one hears it at the boundaries, then who cares? But if it's out in the middle of a 50-acre field with houses all around it and there's no barriers, that's a different story. So, you know, but then you have the town has to be willing and able to measure that noise and enforce that, whether it's family use or club use or commercial use. It would be a similar noise level for everybody.
Well, I think a couple things. One is that if we were to do something like that, to make an exception like that on residential property, you have to have a separate category. You cannot have a commercial racetrack of any kind, right? This would have to be an exception to that if this were a residential use. I personally don't think anybody should be building a closed loop track on their property for this, because it's going to be a never ending nightmare with the neighbors, because it's just going to attract high intensity use. A path through the woods is a completely different thing. You know, an open-ended path through the woods, they tend to go across multiple properties. They tend to go in, you know, power line paths, those kinds of things. And you know, that does cause its own problem, but that is already regulated by the off-road vehicles provision. And that allows you to ride on your property. You can't be 100 feet. You can't go on town property. You know, there's a whole set of regulations already covering that. Regulations that are very often violated, but you know, that's an enforcement issue.
I'll tell you that those regulations will be violated a lot more if you prohibit people from being able to ride on their own property.
They're not being prohibited from riding on their own property.
That's what this law says.
Yes,
They're
they are.
being-
Yes,
they're being
Coty, they are. Yes,
prohibited
they are. If
from-
we say
You are
you can't
prohibiting
have a
people from
closed
using their
loop
property.
track, yep. If you say you can't have a closed loop to ride a motorized vehicle, we're prohibiting use of that.
The way this is written, and
Yeah.
just it sounds like the intent of what you want is really not the problem. The problem is this professional racing situation that you get where you have 16 people or 5 people or 6 people and they're running all hours of the day and they're irritating their neighbors. So
Well,
you have a bad neighbor situation.
The examples that we have currently are all home tracks that
Yep,
get used
Right.
for events.
yep.
Maybe. I would say, I would agree with you up to events.
And
I don't
I
know
would
that that's
bet
true.
you-
That doesn't have to be true. That doesn't have to be the case.
And I
Well,
would
that
bet
doesn't have to be
that
the
all
case
those
for it to
tracks
be
have been there
a
for
problem.
years. They've been there for years.
Well, what about it being used to provide instruction to a group of kids?
It's the same problem.
Yeah.
No, I know that, but I'm
Yeah.
really directing that to Lou because, you know, the case that was before us was very entangled, to say the least.
Right. Yeah, I mean, until today, I would have thought that was not an allowed use. But I mean, you know, using Koti's party or wedding example, I think that is okay
Wait,
under
what
the
is
current
okay?
zoning.
No, under the current zoning,
to-
you can't have a track.
No. You can have a wedding every weekend. Well, you can
Yeah,
teach
a
a kid to
private
ride
wedding.
ride a dirt bike. Yep, you can teach a kid to ride his dirt bike every weekend.
You can, as long as you don't have a set track. But you can put him out in the field and teach
No.
him how to ride his bike every weekend. Absolutely agree. The point is that
So that doesn't get to the issue though, right? If you've got a big field and you say to kids, just don't ride in the same path,
yeah,
you're
That's
still
fine.
going to have the same. You're going to have the same issue, the same noise.
you won't.
And even if every weekend you're going to then put down grass seed and let it grow there, so it doesn't look like a track.
Yeah,
It's
well,
not getting to the root cause.
you won't though. You won't though. It's the track that attracts them to it and creates a place where they're going to do it repeatedly, and where groups are going to come and have events, and where multiple kids are going to come to get lessons and training.
And you think that's allowed now?
I don't.
I
But
don't.
the zoning board had questions about
Okay.
the definition. I don't think it was allowed anyway.
Right.
But the zoning board
Well,
did
no,
not-
the zoning board didn't the first go around. The zoning board didn't find it was a
Correct.
racetrack. The second go around, it was an intensity of use. And so we skirted the whole definition of racetrack issue and just said the intensity of use was not
My
acceptable.
well, multiple members of that board said that it was not a racetrack. And that is why we're discussing it right now. Because racetracks are not permitted. And we need to if we need to clarify what that is, then we have to clarify what that is.
And so what you're saying is any path that is used by a motorized vehicle that looks like a racetrack is a racetrack, regardless of how it got there.
No, watching kids, trying to one up one another is a track, and they were racing. So that's kind of my visual, but we could see it differently and understand it differently.
So when you say, when you're talking about racetrack, Kofi, are you basically describing anything that starts and finishes in the same location?
We
along any
could
path?
do that.
When you have a closed loop.
Because I agree with Jeff on this. I mean, if you're going to ride your quad or your motorcycle or any motorized vehicle, you're going to run it in a circle. Some type of, you're going to go from point A to point A. You're not going to go linear back and forth. And if you go linear back and forth, you get to find that as a to A path as well. It just, I think the definition is too expansive. I think it captures too many things.
Do you have any suggestions?
What Nan was talking about caught my attention. If I have 200 acres and I'm riding around in the middle, and it's not going to bother anyone, probably. If I have 1 acre and I'm living in the hamlet and I set up a track and I run 4 motorcycles on it, I'm going to have a pretty serious impact. So is there a middle ground? How do we do this? It seems to me like we want to regulate noise, but we don't want to say that we're regulating noise.
Okay, let's separate the two things out though at the beginning. We are all agreed we cannot have a commercial racetrack for cars, motorcycles, We could make that as a separate category. Do we all agree on that?
Yes,
I agree with that.
I agree.
Okay, so now we're talking about.
I'm not going to agree to that, but that's a whole nother zoning issue.
Okay,
But
so
right now we can't have right now a racetrack is not allowed.
okay, so we're
Commercial
talking
racetrack.
about, let's try about a path in somebody's backyard. If we went to the decibel level measurement, how does that play out? How does the town measure that? What is the equipment that's required? I mean, again, you're going to have to, is that something somebody can capture on an iPhone to prove now?
I would hope not. And not if we're going to make it in the code. It's going to have to be a specific, the meters that measure sound.
You can
buy the machines that measure the sound.
Oh, sure. Yeah. And
But
it's gonna
That would have to be something that the town would have to have in order to enforce a noise level.
Because, the struggle we always have is catching them at that moment.
On Memorial Day.
Yeah, I noticed that in our town code for planning, if somebody becomes before the planning board and there's a question about noise or road travel or anything else, it's the responsibility of the individual coming before the planning board to hire and get results on that to present. So it wouldn't be a town course necessarily. If, neighbors are complaining about noise, then the individual has to prove that they're not making that noise with a valid certification.
So, but back to Kothi, to your point, you wouldn't have to catch them doing it. If we have a provision that doesn't allow it and people are complaining, then you could just go to the owner and say, you need to go out and do this, whatever this task is, while the town measures the sound. Because I agree, it's not, we can't do it.
But you're expecting them to reenact a situation that is possibly past, because if you had a situation where, okay, they have an event with 16 motorcycles on their property on Memorial Day weekend.
Yeah, that's an easy one though. That's not allowed. You can't do that.
How? How is it not allowed?
There's no use for that. If you want to have an event, you have to have a permit, special permit for it.
Would that include a wedding?
Well, you could have.
Not if it's your own wedding.
You could have 16 friends over to ride their motorcycles on your property. And you would
not routinely.
Not, maybe not every day, but there's no law against that.
Not every weekend.
Yeah.
But I think that's where this gets sticky because, I'm just sitting here listening, the conversation goes back between commercial uses, family uses, one kid on a bike, 16 kids on a bike, so that's where it's really difficult to get at the intensity of use. It doesn't necessarily matter that it's not a commercial use. The impact of that is going to be the same on whether, it could be 2 bikes or it could be 16 bikes. So it goes back to that if there is an issue and the issue is noise, then how do you regulate that? There's a lot of really slippery slope ways of getting at it, but I think that you either have to regulate by noise or you regulate by intensity, which is the number of, maybe the kind of like density, the number of bikes per area or per location. Otherwise, I think that all of the points that you're all bringing up are all valid, and that's the problem with having anything that is like, well, it's a family use or it's a 4-H club that's learning how to ride bikes. I mean, it's got to go by, you have to have one standard that you can not get caught up in, whether it's a family or it's a club or it's for commercial use.
And also, by the way, I don't think number of bikes is really that informative because you could have one kid who rides all the time and has a very loud bike. Now, I don't know about these bikes, whether there are special mufflers that are effective at eliminating sound. So whether you can say, if you're going to ride this on your property, or, if you're going to have a private at-home racetrack or whatever it is, then you have to have this muffler. But I don't know if that's effective.
One of the things that some of these kids now are getting are the electric motorcycles, which are, there's no sound. They're just like an electric car. And there are electric dirt bikes. So, this may, in a few years, it could be a moot point. Because that irritating noise of the motorcycle, which I am very familiar with, having listened to it in my yard for a number of years before my son grew out of it. I can understand why people don't like it, but just like with cars, they're converting. I know people in Ghent that have electric dirt bikes that they ride on their own property. And you don't know they're doing it because you don't hear them. So,
Can I also say that 100 feet is not a lot of distance depending on the topography, and that might be another way you might approach it. I know this track is very close to my neighbors next door, and it's horrendous when 7 bikes are racing around right next door, but I am further away, and because of the topography, it still carries up. But there's no comparison between what I hear and what they hear. So that might be another way to go about it. Getting back to Nan's point, where if you have enough property, you can establish a greater distance. It would be perhaps a different avenue rather than approaching the noise per se.
Just as a point of information, I Googled whether or not there were mufflers for motorbikes that decrease noise. And in fact, that the mufflers are sold to increase noise.
Yeah, we have one of those next door too. They're delightful.
Okay, well, let's talk about the decibel measurement. If we were to say it can't be heard at the property line, what are those measurements? Nan, do you have any examples of towns that have regulated it in this way?
Yeah, I'd have to go back and do some research on what the decibel levels are. And and the other thing is I'd have to go back and see how they've managed to enforce those, how effective those have been. I mean, it's, the noise issue, when you regulate noise, it's not just the decibel, but it's the length of time that noise is being made. It's whether it's a steady noise all the time or whether it fluctuates. There's all sorts of factors that go into good noise ordinances. So it's not just the decibel level. But yes, well, the answer is yes, there are communities that have done it. I don't know without doing some research how effective they ultimately have been to get at this issue. I'd have to do a little research on that for you.
Okay, but I
Do you
think
know, Nan, was it just motorized vehicles?
Versus what?
Chainsaws, lawnmowers, tractors, weed
Depends-
whackers,
Well,
leaf-
yeah,
leaf
no, it
blowers.
depends. Some communities have a noise ordinance that covers all noises. They might prohibit certain noises from that ordinance or law, but
Gotcha.
so it could go either way. Some zoning have for specific uses, like, I'm just pulling because I'm working on one. Wind towers have a decibel level that's set that you can't exceed a certain decibel level at the property line for that use. So sometimes the noise regulations are set by use, and sometimes it's an overall noise level for all noises.
Yeah, so we would be establishing whatever our town government decides is the most irritating noise level. Is that, what noise is most irritating and how loud can that be? That's why I'm worried about this noise ordinance thing.
Well, here's the thing. I think what is being suggested by regulating the noise by use is that it's the particular use that there's no end in time for these kinds of vehicles. People don't go out and joyride on their lawnmowers. Farmers don't, go over hay fields more, for fun over and over again. Those things are set in time. This is a recreational activity that could be
Well,
potentially
not
limited.
not necessarily is it recreational. Like I said, with Claverick Motocross right close by, our town's produced a number of motocross riders over the years that have gone professional. So
Well,
these guys aren't doing it just for kicks, just to annoy their neighbors.
Well, then
They're
they
doing it
can
to
practice
to go somewhere.
They can practice at a professional racetrack.
No, they can't.
So, but it's
That's
also,
paid
they're not riding their tractors and lawnmowers recreationally, but they could be mowing their lawn right along your property line at 6 o'clock on a Saturday morning.
Right.
Yeah. And
Right.
they
They could run their,
So it comes down to what are you going to consider a bad neighbor? It's people that are annoying you. Neighbors just need to get along and stop complaining about each other. They should start talking and working things like this out. And I hate for our zoning code to be incorporated into that process.
Well, I think what's happened in the instances that we have seen is that people have tried to talk to their neighbors repeatedly and to no avail.
I think it's a good notion that, people should be good neighbors, but there's some things that some folks don't want to be good neighbors about. This notion of, it's my property, I get to do whatever I wanted at whatever time I want on it. And
That's why we need zoning. If everyone was a good neighbor and did the right thing, we wouldn't need zoning at all,
Right.
unfortunately.
so can we get at it by calling it, can we base it on intensity of use? And if it exceeds some intensity of use, it becomes a special event venue.
Right.
or it becomes some other use that's currently an allowed use that needs to have a special use permit or go before planning. But make it
Well-
based on intensity of use, however we decide to define that, as opposed to measuring sound.
Well, you can have an event, the concert events or festivals, that's like twice a year for 2 days
Yeah.
each. So I think that would be, that was the concept I would have suggested for the temporary racetrack, right? If you want to have a racing event twice a year at your property to exceed no more than 2 days, then you have to follow all of the provisions of 19019L. But what that doesn't
Right, but
help.
you could still call it a venue though, right? If based on intensity of use. You could say it's a special event venue, and then the buffer, the time, the noise, all that then comes into play if it's a special event venue.
Well, then you've got to have 30 acres. There are a whole lot of.
Right. Yeah.
But I would not support a special event venue in a residential neighborhood that is for motorized racing. No.
That's not the question. That's not the issue. That's a planning board to decide. What I'm saying is,
No, it's not. It's actually what we're deciding right now. That's what the town board will decide.
No. My point is, if the intensity of use exceeds some predefined use, then it becomes a special event venue, which then goes before planning for a permit. Right? Because we allow a special event venue with a special permit,
This town
special use permit.
has prohibited racetracks for many years now.
Right. And I'm not talking about that.
Right.
Yeah, we are.
I'm not talking about a racetrack. It's a venue. And what we've described here is a family hosting weddings, call it a party, motorcycles. It could be anything. If that intensity of use exceeds some defined limit, then it has to be considered a special event venue. And then it has to meet all those requirements.
Yeah, I think there's, again, Lou, it's a nice way to get around having anything in place, but there really is a difference between people getting together. So I'll give you the flip side for a wedding versus, 20 people getting together for a wedding versus 20 people getting together to ride their motorbikes in a loop in your front yard that's 50 or 100 feet from your next door neighbor.
Right, except if they do it once. And
Yeah,
you
but
can have a wedding. You can say again.
We're really not talking about doing it once.
That's right. That's what I'm
right.
saying. It's based on an intensity of use.
I don't know what you mean by intensity of use. Do you mean number of times, number of vehicles, decibel level? What do you mean?
It could be
All
any
those things.
or all that.
Right.
If my neighbor's having a party, a wedding party every weekend, and they're up until midnight and they've got live music going, they can do it. But I'm going to go to the town and say, wait, this is an event. It happens every weekend. It's routine. It doesn't even have to be every weekend. It could be a few times a year.
It's a private party.
I don't agree. I don't think it. I know we've got that definition, but if you're having a private party every weekend and you've got live music outside, I would argue that's a special event.
Not if nobody's paying anybody for it. It's
So then what's the difference if you have 15 dirt bikes show up?
Right.
That's why the regulation was set up.
I asked, what's the difference, right? If the party is disturbing the neighbors and the dirt bikes are disturbing the neighbors, what's the difference?
The difference is you're not going to outlaw somebody having a house. They could have a house party, but you can regulate a track. Anyway,
we regulate events.
our time is up for this. I think that what we should do at this point is allow Nan to go and take a look at some examples and make some suggestions for us. I think that the issues are pretty clear.
What, I don't think the issues are clear. Are we talking about noise or are we talking about intensity of use?
We're talking about both.
Yes, I think that we need to look at some examples from what other towns have done. This is not a new issue in the world.
Oh, no, I agree with that.
Yeah.
So let's see some different approaches.
And we're going to focus just on motorized vehicles?
It
Yes.
is true
That was the question. I mean, I think by bringing up weddings and other kinds of activities confuses the matter. I think the issue was related to motorized vehicles. And for this issue, you ought to stick to a solution for motorized vehicles. If there are other issues with other kinds of use of private property, I think those are different issues. I think you can't, I think it would be very difficult to create one thing that covers everything. I think the issue is motorized vehicles, and that's what you ought to focus on.
And, we have to, at the moment, what we're addressing are issues that have been raised within our community. We have had these complaints, we've had issues before the board.
Twice.
And
How about golf carts?
Oh, they're not noisy. Let's forget the golf carts.
Right, so we're talking
Right,
about
but
noise.
that's the problem with this law, the way it's written.
We're talking about noise. I mean, let's just,
Listen,
guys,
guys,
going to look at
It's-
some other
it's-
options.
and it has to be dealt with. Let's be clear, and you can.
I don't
Why?
agree. It doesn't have to be dealt with.
It hasn't been dealt with for years. We've got kids all over this town riding dirt bikes
It
everywhere.
doesn't have to be dealt with. We're talking about noise,
It's the sound that irritates some people. That's the problem.
right? And it irritates me. I'm not arguing
Yeah,
that
and it
it's not
irritates me too.
irritating.
Yeah.
But I'm not gonna go down the road and tell the kid down the road that has one, say, will you shut up? Will you shut that thing off?
I would if they did it if they did it.
Because 10
too
years
early in the
ago, he
morning
would have
or
been
too
up
late in
here
the evening.
screaming at me.
Listen,
Oh,
we're not
I
talking
go
about
talk to the neighbors.
We're not talking about one or two dirt bikes, cross motorbikes going at one at a time. I have them going behind my backyard. They're much closer than anything, any of you are talking about. I couldn't give a hoot. All right.
You know, it's-
Now, if it starts
Right,
happening every morning at 6 a.m, I will. And if it starts happening, and sometimes it does, at 10 and 11 at night, I listen to see if it's going to keep going or if it disappears quickly. If it dissipates, very nice.
That's what I consider an intensity issue, an intensity of use. If it's once,
But-
it's not intense. If
But
it's for 2 hours at a time, that's an intensity.
How
Of use.
about if it prevents you from being able to rent your second home that you purchased to be able to rent out sometimes, but you can't anymore because you can't predict when all that noise is going to happen? That's what we're running into in this neighborhood. So that's another thing just to think about.
Okay. Well, we're going to close on that note.
Hey, quick question for you on the meeting minutes, Kofi.
Mhm.
Was Chuck at the last meeting?
Yes,
He was?
yes.
I don't remember him being there.
Yes, he was there.
And why are there 3 town board members on this committee? And that's what caught my attention is I saw that he was on the meeting minutes. I didn't think we had 3 board members.
We do.
I thought it was just you and Mal. Are we allowed to do that?
Yes.
Why did we kick Pete Nelson out of one of the last, I don't know, maybe 2 committees ago?
He shouldn't have been.
Okay.
Okay, so what I would suggest so that we don't get too far behind is if people could send, I actually have a lot of notes on these revisions. If we could maybe send the notes in writing and do kind of another draft that's cleanup. If there are substantive points, we can include them in the comments for discussion. But if there's just cleanup, let's go ahead and send them so that we can get a revised draft circulated prior to the next meeting so that we can, move it along. And then in between these meetings, hopefully Nan will be able to send us some different models to look at on this issue, and we can discuss it.
Hey,
Maybe
Nan,
things
could you
will
try
take a little longer than we
sending the
thought.
Word file again, Nan? I'm not sure that was the most current file. It looked like it was several months old.
Yeah,
did-
well, I will send the most recent file. Let me just open, yeah, the most recent one has a date of 6/15/21 on it.
A Word
think-
file.
I think it was
Yes.
there were some cumulative red lines.
Yeah, could you resend that one? The one that you sent, if you look in the info section, it hadn't been updated since February.
Yeah, I don't know. I have to go back and see what one got sent, but the date on it, I'm looking at it right now, 6/15/21, and I will resend that to everybody right
Yeah,
as soon as we hang up.
I'd appreciate that. Thank you.
Yep,
The Word version, right? I've got the
Correct.
PDF. Yeah. Okay.
correct. Yep.
All right, so if we're going to take a little longer, I think, to resolve this issue and not finish up in August, maybe we'll just skip August, but try to get as much as we can done in July. A lot of people are traveling and we're trying to do things in person going forward. So we'll do
Yeah, I
the
like
July,
that suggestion. Yeah.
yeah, July meeting in person, skip August, and see where we get from there.
You gotta find a place to go in August. Everything's booked.
I know you had to book very early this year.
Yeah,
You know what, one thing that
And
might
next
make
year.
July more efficient is if you all could read through where we're at now with the draft and
Yep.
include comments, just send them around, put sidebar comments in, or however you want to identify your comments, and send them around so everybody can read them. The word tweaks, I don't know if you need everybody to have an hour-long discussion over grammar or apostrophes or things like that. The things that you need to concentrate on are these, policy issues and what you want to regulate and how you want to regulate. So maybe to move some things along, if everyone could send along their comments so everybody can see it, we can weed out, typos and clarity kind of things so that you guys can concentrate on the policy.
I agree.
Yep.
I agree. We will definitely, let's try to do that. Move it along. Okay. All right. Well, thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
thank you.
Okay.
Have a good night, folks.
Bye.